timeout. Bang! Bang! Oh, what a shot from Curry! You don't like that? You don't like NBA basketball!
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we are with you with a special fundraising episode. We are with Ben Taylor of Thinking Basketball, a basketball analyst that both Khan and I have long followed, admired their work, and possibly the person we referenced the most on the show, honestly. We didn't mention this to you, but so it is an honor to have you with us, and especially for a good cause. We are doing this to raise money, raise funds for the affected people from the earthquakes of February 6th in Turkey that left almost 50,000 people dead and millions displaced. We already had a Turkish language episode on the subject where we talked about it and announced our fundraising efforts. I'll repeat here again. We are donating all the income from our channel during the 2023 year. That is every ad money, that is everything that comes to us from the join and thanks button on YouTube, and also Spotify, and Apple Podcasts, etc. And we also match every donation that is going to be made today on the show, and the links for that is on the description of the video, and I'll be putting the QR code on the screen throughout most of the show. From the QR code, you'll be donating to DC Earthquake Relief Fund. It's a grassroots organization I am personally involved with, that we've raised over $50,000 since the earthquake. All this money goes directly to people affected in the region. We spent the money on container homes, tents, medical supplies, scholarship funds, and with the evolving needs in the region, we direct 100% of the money directly to the families in the area. Once again, I want to thank Ben in front of everyone. Especially on a Sunday, there are very good NBA games going on right now. Dallas Phoenix, I think, just finished. Lakers Warriors. I know you're probably chomping at the bits to watch some basketball, so we won't take too much of your time. But again, it's an honor and pleasure to have you. And today we are going to be talking about best young international players in the league. We're going to try to make a top 5 international prospects. So we put the line in 23 and under. So players who are having their age 23 season, according to Basketball Reference. And we are going to be talking about the best young players in the league. So, Khan, do you want to take it from here? And we can carry on the conversation with Ben.
Yeah, let's dive into it. Ben, I just wanted to ask you very quick first. I know you make a decent amount of lists, both historically and currently, but you also have a pretty interesting approach to it, where you kind of have tiers or ranges. We're not going to obviously get into those details today, but when you think of a list like this, like thinking about the top players 23 and under, and you're thinking about which one I would prefer for the rest of their kind of careers, what are some of like the elements you think about in terms of peak, longevity, value added, stuff like that?
Well, before I answer that, I appreciate all the kind words. My Turkish is not good enough to know how much you guys are talking about me on a normal episode. So I appreciate that. And I just want to echo what Jem said, which is, hopefully we can continue to fundraise for the earthquake relief. Obviously it's unfortunate, and I think it's a great cause to directly be able to help. I sometimes think about my own charitable givings and why like disasters immediately draw a response. And I think it's because it's such an immediate, direct thing that you can help with on the ground right afterwards. So I appreciate you guys doing that. And thank you to Jem for setting that up. Basketball wise. Okay. So young prospects to me are really interesting after having done so much historical work, because I feel like a lot of times, and it's really hard, you get into scouting players when they're younger, you get into the draft, with NBA draft Twitter is its own thing. You get into guys when they're rookies in the league, and we make these lists of 23 and under and things like that. But it's so hard sometimes to think about like what it means when the player is 28, when they're 7 or 9 or 10 years away. What's going to happen to them physically as they mature? How will they age physically? And then how does the way they play basketball today give them a room to grow into these skills that we might describe as feel or mastery, or, he went away over the summer and then he added this. What kind of foundation does the player have? So I think over the years, I've really come to think of this as a very long-term kind of thing. Like where can I really see the heart of this guy's career when he's 25 to 30? And recently, now that we've got all this technology and players are playing at high levels until they're 35, I'm even thinking about like the back end of that aging curve, where there's a huge difference in career value between someone making 5 extra all-star teams in their 30s and someone who is like, kind of fizzled out and is turned into a secondary player or a role player or a bench player. So at a high level, that's kind of how I think about this. Specifically, we'll get into some of these players as we talk about them. They're kind of fun. But the last thing for me specifically with some of these guys is I am not necessarily focused on the potential of the player, right? That's always great, but that's like the high-end outcome. The high-end outcome sometimes is the potential. I'm really interested in what's a most likely range that this player is going to fall into. I don't need 50 things to go right for them to be an all-star. I need 1 or 2 things to go right, and there's historical precedent. And I think I kind of take it from there, really just like thinking about, I guess the last thing related to that is thinking about what I see today that is going to be a shell of what they grow into. All great players, for the most part, when you go back and watch them when they're 21, 22, 20, 19, you can see the flashes. It's just they haven't put the game together. So even with guys that aren't going to be all-stars that we'll talk about on this list, I'm kind of still thinking about like, how good are you at basketball right now, knowing that you're young and you're going to learn not to make that silly pass. You're going to learn to make this read. You're going to learn to make this low man rotation and recognize some coverage or something like that. So that's my approach when we get into prospects like this.
Yeah. No, I mean, that makes a ton of sense. And I think it's even hard. I mean, you have to draw the line somewhere, and we did it at 23, but it's actually quite different to evaluate a 23-year-old versus a 19 or a 20-year-old, and then try to kind of put them on the same list.
Well, along those lines, Con, I think it's hard enough when you get to see them play in the NBA and they're still only 20 or 21, but it's really, really hard when they're like 18 and you haven't seen them. So that's, I grew up watching tons of college and younger players back before we even had the same international pipeline to the NBA. And that's a big shift for me. And just noticing like getting that extra year or two, 10 years out, you still don't know very well, but at least you get to start to see them experiment at the highest level. And that's what we're going to talk about today with some of these guys, right? They're in their second, third season. Yeah.
All right. Well, let's get to the guys. So the way we are going to do this is we're going to try to get a top 5, like Jem said, and we're going to start off with the guys that are, the ones that were just left out. And Ben's gonna kind of react to the list that Jem and I came up with. And I'll also add that, this is a bit more difficult than just doing like top prospects league-wide, because you have a smaller pool of players. So obviously, once you get down to like 7, 8, the levels, we're not talking about like major superstars in the future in all likelihood. So, that gets a bit more tricky too, I think. All right. So the ones that, weren't really in the consideration of serious consideration for top 5 for us, I'll list off the 6 names. We have Jonathan Kuminga from the Warriors, Dyson Daniels from the Pelicans, Lou Dort with the Thunder, RJ Barrett with the Knicks, Josh Green from the Mavs, and Jeremy Sohan from the Spurs. So those 6 I thought were like, maybe had some arguments, but didn't really make that final cut to be considered for the top 5. Does anyone jump out from that list to you, Ben?
Well, I think on the high side, because he's such a unique player, I actually haven't seen a ton of them, but from what I've seen, I'm basing this idea on Sohan. I think it's very hard to think about, like, what is his career going to look like when he's like 25 or 27 years old? If he's really an elite defender and he can do some other intangible things, how good does that make you? How sustainable is that for 5, 7, 8 years? So he jumps out as a guy that's like, I wouldn't have in my top 5 either if you asked me to make the list. But I think from that group, to me, he's actually the one that has that really interesting potential. Whereas I think for a lot of mainstream people, certainly Warriors fans for the last couple of years, there's been talk about Kuminga. And Kuminga is a great example of someone that when I watch him now, his feel and some of the things he's not able to do, I need a lot of ifs to come through. Like, if this happens, if this happens, if this happens, there's a lot of that for me. So I actually think a more likely outcome is that Kuminga doesn't really turn into anything that's significantly special. Whereas Sohan from that list, again, I wouldn't have him there, but he's so fascinating, it's hard to project. The only other guy to me that's kind of interesting, if you think about having a really solid career, is RJ Barrett. I still don't even know how I feel about RJ Barrett as a player right now. He's still only 22 years old. It feels like he's shifted his role each season that he's been with the Knicks under Tibbs. And I certainly don't look at him and think like there's a future star. But I do think when you're talking about the types of players here that we'll get to on this board, like a really solid 10-year career as a starter, that's going to be pretty valuable. So yeah, those are the guys that jump out from that group to me.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Jem, any thoughts before we start moving on?
No, we can go to the top 5. Then I will kind of, I want Ben to kind of talk about if he considers the situation each young player is drafted into, or the organization, or the developmental capacity of each team, and if that impacts his analysis of where he expects these players to be. Especially, like, for example, we're talking about Sohan, the fact that he is in a situation where, like the Spurs, where he is going to get a lot of minutes because it's a rebuilding team. And it is a good developmental organization. So does that mean he is more likely to get to where we hopefully expect him to be? That's kind of, we're going to get to, for example, Alperen Şengün, that you had a breakdown video that I would recommend everyone watch, where he's more in a situation that is, there's a clear lack of organization in the Houston Rockets. It's a very chaotic situation, you could say.
This is a very sensitive issue in the Turkish NBA community. Like, what's going to happen to Alperen with the Rockets?
So yeah, I mean, it's a great question. For me, it cuts both ways, right? So when you're in a good developmental situation, I'm taking that into account, assuming I think you're going to continue to be in a good developmental situation, which applies perfectly to someone like Şengün, right? Where he is, I want to be careful about my words here, he's not in the greatest situation. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, I think everyone would agree.
Yeah. He's not in the greatest situation. And so then to me, the question, even with some of his teammates, right, who get talked about a lot over here, the Jalen Greens of the world, how long are you going to be in that situation before bad habits develop? In Alpi's case, I don't feel like it's bad habits. I feel like it's opportunity and the way they use him. And the big thing with him that we'll get to is, you know, what's going to happen to him defensively. And what jumped out to me when I started watching these Rockets games more seriously and scouting is like, wow, this is a really, really weird defensive scheme, the way they're using him. Yeah. And you presume it's because he has weaknesses defensively. But to the point of your question, like if you were to carry that forward for X number of years, how is he going to improve defensively? So I take it to account both ways, where I think about bad habits developing, but I also think about, if this is a good developmental timeline, can we keep you on that timeline for the next 3 or 4 years? And in his case in Houston, like maybe can we get you off? Like, is there going to be some organizational change that shifts things a little? So yeah, it's definitely something that's in my head. And I think it's a very real thing for these guys that impacts them, some cases subtly, and in some cases quite a bit. And we only get to watch reality unfold one time. So you know, we never really know, but that's my take on it.
Yeah, no, that's a tough restriction on evaluation. Just watching it once.
Yeah.
You know? Let's move to the. So I have 7 guys, and then those are all for top 5 consideration. So the next tier, are kind of getting into our first tier here. Is 7. I have Shaedon Sharpe, 6 Josh Giddey, 5 Ben Mathurin, and then 4 I have Alperen Şengün. So those kind of 4 guys I put on the same tier. Maybe I imagine from your comments about Kuminga, maybe on Shaedon Sharpe, you might be a little lower, but maybe I'm just kind of extrapolating not correctly.
Yeah, similar thing. Although Sharpe is younger, I can't remember their birth dates off the top of my head, but I know he's a little bit younger. He also, I mean, man, I don't know what it does as a ceiling, but if he has the combination of the pull-up jumper and some of his explosiveness on drives, he's a little more put together with the handle. One of the things that's interesting about Kuminga is like, what's going on with his ball handling? Does he have really small hands? Does that limit you developmentally? How good can you become as a ball handler if you don't have good ball handling now? No. Kuminga, presumably, his athletic advantage is facing against big forwards or bigger players and taking them off the dribble, whereas Sharpe is a little bit more traditional. So I would be probably a little bit lower compared to the other guys in this group, but he's still more of a curiosity to me in my head. My top 5, if I had to pick a top 5, it would be from those 6 other players. I think the guy that would be out for me would be Mathurin, who I like. He just feels more like a solid kind of one-dimensional dude. That's my take. I like watching the Pacers. They're a good watch, but when I see them, there's not a ton of stuff that's jumping out other than the fact that he's like already a solid player. He can play in these lineups. He's a good shooter, those kinds of things. But it's hard for me to see, okay, what's he going to grow into as a great defender, as a wing? What's he going to add offensively that gives him another dimension? So he's a guy I like, but I think if I had to pick, going back to the top when I was talking about my criteria, I think I would have Giddey, Şengün, and the top 3 that I think we'll all agree on that you have. I don't want to spoil anything, but the higher tiers that we haven't gotten to.
Right. Ben Mathurin's gems guy, so I don't know if he has any problems with that. But
I mean, I do like him a lot, and I think it's an argument probably of high-end outcomes versus median outcomes. Like his floor is probably higher than some of the guys maybe in front of him, but I agree with Ben in the sense that like it is hard to see him become an offensive driver of good offense, being first option, second option on a really good team. That is harder to see compared to a guy like Josh Giddey or Alperen Şengün. Like I do agree with that.
I think it's time to talk about Şengün, which is probably what half the people are here for.
Probably.
In the video, you called him Bizarre Jokic, which I thought was a great kind of name, a great place to start from.
Yeah, I think the one thing, when you make a video, it's hard to cram everything in, and I ended up cutting this just for time and flow. But I was able to get access to some of the pick and roll second spectrum numbers, and I think people would be shocked at how effective they are when Şengün is directly involved. You know, you would look at the league leaders and it's like Jokic and a handful of other Luka Doncic and like a handful of other high-level offensive players that are all-stars. And then I think Şengün was like 9th. And then the next closest Rocket was like 80th. And it's a smaller sample, obviously. But I think the thing that really jumped out to me from watching it on tape is like, you have this crazy environment that they're playing in Houston. The players, I would say, outside of KJ Martin and him don't have great chemistry. And yet when you are running this elbow offense with him really looking to pass as a big man hub, it's already pretty effective. And we know the Rockets aren't a good team, but like that number really jumped off the page to me. And in a way, maybe was why I ended up making the video, because there are other things that are more complex with his defense that we should talk about next, and maybe his athleticism. But when I think in today's game, when you have someone that is that good at reading the game, that is that good of a passer, and in his case, like much like Jokic, like knows how to use his body, spins, backing people down around the basket, that combination is already really effective in the regular season, and he's only 20. And so in theory, if you can add to that, you have someone that, at least as a regular season offensive player, is going to be pretty good and could be really good. That's how I came away thinking about it.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree on the offensive part. And just this much production at this age is, you just don't kind of get players who don't end up in like a very solid or a great level when they're producing at this age this much, whatever the context is kind of.
Yeah, I think in a weird way, Luis Scola came into my head just because of the way he used his body a little and some of his footwork, and you know, he was a decent passer. And you just think of guys like that, that especially as they grow up and become like, you know, quote unquote men, you know, 24, 26 years old and get that experience, they're just always good as a baseline. So that side of the equation is interesting, because I think his floor is pretty good and his ceiling gets really interesting when you see what happened with someone like Jokic. Now, he doesn't have the shooting, so you might not get the same dimension, but you also can't teach, you know, that's a big part of it. And the three guys you have ahead of him, you can't teach some of the things that he has with his feel and his instinct and his vision and his creativity, which makes him very fun to watch. And so again, when you see that in young players, usually that has some carryover to refinement and success as you get into your 20s in your career.
Yeah.
And I wanted to ask one thing. We see there's a, I guess, I don't know if we can call it a trend. Maybe you can talk a bit about this, but we see with guys like Jokic and Sabonis, or sometimes how the Heat use Adebayo at times, with centers being used more as an offensive hub, maybe more than they were even like 5 years ago or 10 years ago. Is this the template Houston Rockets or whatever team that ends up with Şengün should use Şengün in that role? Or guys like Jokic and Sabonis, are they just an anomaly? They're just too good, and so it makes sense for teams to use them that way? Or is there a value to use your skilled center like Şengün in an offensive hub kind of role?
No, I would use him that way. I think you're going to get the most out of the playmaking. His scoring and his outside shooting might, when you get to higher levels or as he matures in his career, it might alter the equation a little bit. I mean, I think you see that with Bam in Miami. The thing that always gets me with Bam is he's just not a good shooter. So it changes the sort of the potency of the equation a little bit, how dangerous they can be. But that's exactly how I'd use them. And I think the simple way to describe how powerful that is you're taking your fifth player on the court, who used to be your least skilled offensive player, and you're making him one of your most important drivers, while the other four sort of non-centers, non-bigs run around. So if they can shoot and cut and pass and play pick and roll and play two-man and play dribble handoff, now you've empowered everyone by playing through the big man like this. I think that's what's so powerful about it.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
So Ben, we have Howard with us too.
Fantastic. Is Howard live? Can we get him in here?
Yes, we can definitely get him in here. Let's get. I don't know, Ben. We weren't sure how much time you have left, but
I got about 3 minutes. I just want to get some crosstalk with Howard and see how he's doing.
This is great. Ben and I have spoken before. We've never actually seen each other. What's up, Ben?
Well, I have been able to see your face through various media publications over the years. Yeah, and honestly, I wouldn't be surprised. I covered the Lakers in 2009. I wouldn't be surprised if we were in the same locker room or media room at some point. But it's good to see you live and almost in person.
Apologies, guys. I don't have my professional mic plugged in right now. Hope you're hearing me okay. So
that's all right. Yes, our audience is very used to technical difficulties and issues like that, so you'll be fine. And you sound perfectly clear. So I want to thank you for joining us as well. We're gonna talk about top 5 most intriguing players for the rest of the season after Ben. After we are done with our list with Ben. So Howard, if you give us maybe a minute to finish up the list.
Absolutely.
Howard, you can comment and tell us what we got right and wrong.
Yes. Yeah. So Khan, do you want to finalize the list and we can maybe get Howard's ideas about the top 3 as well?
Yeah. So we were talking about top 5 international prospects. So that's age 23 or younger. And before coming to the last 3, the 4 we listed were Shaedon Sharpe, Josh Giddey, Ben Mathurin, and Alperen Şengün, which was kind of the point of selecting this topic to talk about Alperen, with the Turkish background. And then our top 3 is Franz Wagner at 3, Paolo Banchero at 2, and the number 1, Luka Doncic, which I guess we don't have to talk about that much. He technically turned 24, but we're using the basketball reference age, so it's kind of his age 23 season. So that's, if you have to, if I just repeat the top 5, it would be Luka, Paolo Banchero, Franz Wagner, Alperen Şengün, and then Ben Mathurin. And we just added Giddey and Sharpe in the same kind of 6-7 right at the end.
Yeah, so I think I would go Giddey, Şengün, and then I think the top 3 I agree on. Luka obviously is sort of in his own world here. I think between the Magic big guys, if I had to pick one, it's actually kind of tricky. Paolo is already very good, but I'm intrigued by what kind of high-level player he can be, which I think gives Franz an argument. I think Franz has a lot to continue to grow into to be a really successful player, possibly even an all-star type player. So, yeah, but it's a good list. You guys did a nice job. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Howard, do you have any opinions about, let's say, Banchero versus Franz Wagner, or is there anyone you would put in that group that we maybe missed?
I'll be honest, because I had not given it any thought since I didn't know we were going to be talking about it. So I was like trying to quickly process as you guys were going through the names. Is there anybody missing? And probably not. I mean, I think you guys probably pretty well covered it. And of course, in a few months, Victor Wembanyama is just going to be,
I asked if I could use him, but it had to be NBA players, though.
That'd be cheating right now.
Yeah,
we'll just take Luka's spot from the top. So
yeah,
ages out.
Exactly. There we go. It's nice and clean that way. Wagner versus Banchero. That's really interesting. I'm just gonna pull back a minute here and just say this. I think one of the most interesting things, one of the trickiest things about NBA stardom among young players is that the trajectory.
Sorry, I'm going to interrupt 1 second. I think Ben has to jump out.
Go for it. Yeah.
Howard, I'll let you cook. Thanks guys for having me. Hopefully we raise some good money.
Yes, I was going to just mention that we're getting a lot of good donations.
Awesome.
Thank you so much for joining. We really, really appreciate it. And know that you have a very big fan base in Turkey. Once we announced, both Howard and you, that we're going to have you on, the amount of messages we got about how much you're loved and admired in Turkey, I thought you guys should know.
I appreciate that. I'll get out of here. Howard, show's all yours.
Ben, great to see you, man.
You too. Thanks, guys.
Sorry to interrupt you, Howard.
No, not at all. It's interesting. Like, guys develop at different rates, and like sometimes these things, like you can't, the outline of it. Okay, Banchero's a number 1 overall pick, so you immediately kind of gravitate toward the idea like he's got the higher upside just based on the impression of a draft position, but we know that that's not always determinative, and there's all these things that you can't quantify properly or know fully at the moment that a guy comes into the league. How many, the stars and the separate the stars from the rotation guys and the superstars from the just stars. A lot of it is how much they work in the off season and to expand their game and how much they want to be that guy. And so even when you're talking about ceilings on these guys, like the ceilings might be theoretically similar, but the actual execution might have much more to do with who really wants to be that guy, and how much more they're adding to their game, and making it a priority to keep evolving. And I just, one of the things I learned in 16 years of being a beat writer assigned to a team before becoming a national writer is that that stuff a lot better when you're there every day, right? So I don't know what Banchero's work habits are or what Franz Wagner's work. Like there's just no you can't get that sense from a distance. So I don't have any intel on those guys in particular, but the Magic, after all these years of just seeming directionless, finally feel like they have something substantial to build on. And even losing Jonathan Isaac yet again to injury, to me, doesn't even feel like a setback anymore. Like once upon a time, they were banking everything on the idea that he was going to be a defensive player of the year candidate perennially, and his offense would evolve, and he'd be this amazing player with his length and versatility and all this. Like, it's almost like you don't even factor him into their trajectory anymore. Even before this latest injury, I wasn't even thinking of him as like a critical player for them anymore. It's about these other 2 guys, and they've rehabbed Markelle Fultz really nicely, and a couple other players that are solid enough. They still have a ways to go, but the Magic, as you guys point out, even in just listing those 2 guys as 2 of the top, international guys under 24 was the cutoff. That right there shows you the kind of promise they finally have there. So,
no, I think that makes a ton of sense. And with the Jonathan Isaac point, like the Magic have this season already been especially in the last couple of months, quite solid defense without Jonathan Isaac playing a huge factor. So I think that's a great point. And I think having 2 guys like this on the wing also gives you so much optionality as a team that it's much easier to, I think, build around, because they can play with different types of guys because of their position that they play in.
Yeah.
I guess if you don't mind, Howard, we didn't really discuss this with you before, sorry, but would you mind talking about Alperen Şengün for a few minutes, perhaps? Because since we're a Turkish channel, I know a lot of our fans love hearing about Şengün and what the national media members like yourself think about him, what his ceiling, what his potential is. Then we can move on to our subject, if you don't mind.
I honestly don't have much to share there. The Rockets have not been a team I've spent a lot of time on this season for obvious reasons. I should, like there's a number of different ways to do this job, and we all have our own kind of purview on these things. The way I've covered the league for the last couple of publications I've been with, it's been pretty much hitting on the top line stuff, and so that means that the losing teams, the bad teams, while I should be watching as much as possible of just about everybody, I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not spending a ton of time watching the Rockets, especially in a year where we've got so many intriguing storylines, not just at the top, but even in the middle, because the middle is bloated and weird and ever changing. And so, yeah, I wish I had a great, I should have actually thought ahead to like the idea of like who the audience is on this one, and spent some time. But like I honestly just don't. I don't have any special insight for you on Şengün, and I'm sure Ben, being as smart as he is, probably gave you guys more than enough.
Yes. Yeah. Sorry to put you on the spot.
Oh, good.
That. Apologize. Okay, then Khan, do you want to take from here and start talking about our topic with Howard?
Yeah, sure. I think Howard already started segueing into it when he said there's so many intriguing stories this season. So our topic is going to be like the 5 or so most interesting, intriguing players to watch for the rest of the season. That obviously includes the playoffs. Howard, I don't know if you had time to make a list or something, but we just have a few guys. We can start with one and then switch to yours, or we can, however you want to do it. We can
sure. I mean, we could just kind of go around. I mean, I kind of quickly just jotted down a few names. Yeah. I didn't spend a ton of time getting too deep or looking up anybody's on-off numbers or anything. But
sure.
But yeah, there's a few guys I had in mind. But yeah, feel free to start anywhere, and we could just kind of go around.
Yeah. No, let's start from your list. Who are some of the names that first popped to your head?
I mean, right off the top, I hate having to like reach for like a big name right off the top, but he's unavoidable. But it's Anthony Davis. LeBron's out at least a few weeks, and key point, when a team says somebody's going to be reevaluated in a week or 2 weeks or 3 weeks, it doesn't mean they're back then. It just means that's the next time that it's even reasonable medically to see whether there's anything to update, right? So we don't know how long LeBron's going to be out. We have seen at times this season Anthony Davis absolutely dominate the way that he was when he first came into the league and his early years with New Orleans, and at times that he has with the Lakers. There have been many times over the last few years where we thought that guy wasn't around anymore, and you wondered, is Anthony Davis capable of being the guy the Lakers need him to be, which is to eventually take the baton from LeBron James, and even while LeBron is still playing at a high level, to be part of a devastating 1-2 punch. And I think Anthony Davis has shown lately pretty strongly, and they're playing as we speak, and I have not looked up where that game is at right now, but Anthony Davis, like, we're going to learn a lot about him over these next few weeks, and he's got to stay healthy, and there's he's banged up again. I mean, he is playing banged up. I think he's playing today, right? But there's been 2 questions about him. Can he stay healthy? He's got 15 points already in
there we go.
Early in the second quarter. So
wow.
He's answering the bell today. I had to look that up while we were talking. But to the extent that the Lakers might still salvage this season, and every time we think they're about to, something else happens, it's on him. It really is on him. And they've improved the supporting cast. And if LeBron were healthy right now, I'd have a lot of confidence that this team would at minimum make the play-in and maybe even crack the top 6, because it's close enough that they could. And at the time that they've reformatted the roster and got a few games under their belt with the new group, I thought they had a shot. LeBron goes down. It's questionable now.
Yeah.
But Anthony Davis, at his best in his career, has been a player who you could classify as a top 5 player. And if he plays at that top 5 or top 10 level with the renewed supporting cast they have, now the Lakers still have a shot to at least tread water or gain ground while LeBron is out, and still make this postseason meaningful. Meaningful is in the eye of the beholder, right? Does meaningful mean just making the playoffs? Does it mean winning a round, 2 rounds, making the finals? That's eye of the beholder stuff. To me, meaningful means at minimum you're not a lottery team wasting another year of LeBron's career.
Yeah, and you're being kind of competitive at least, whatever round you're playing.
Yeah.
And I think AD's quite interesting because he was actually, when I made my top 5, he was like my second. He was like 7th on my list. I kind of cut him off before my top 5, but I thought it was quite interesting because, his shooting has kind of gone away over the last few years, and that's been some of an issue. But I think with the renewed Lakers roster, even if the shooting doesn't come back much, the roster's better adapted to that. So I think, as long as he's healthy and is having that defensive presence and finishing, it's a very kind of there is the supporting cast there to be competitive, I think. Jem, did you have AD or
no? I mean, he was one of the last cutoffs for me too. Howard said he didn't want to start off with a big name, but the person number one on my list was also a very big name too. So that's completely fine. I don't know if you want to transition. I kind of had Joel Embiid as my top guy to watch for the rest of the season plus playoffs, because it seems like as incredible of a player as he is, and he's probably going to finish in the probably top 2 of the MVP voting for a 3rd year in a row. He's still missing that kind of signature playoff season or signature playoff series win. A lot of the times for reasons outside his control, kind of like weird injuries, freak injuries during the playoffs. He hasn't been able to perform at the level the Sixers fans expect him to. They haven't made the conference finals yet with Embiid there. And I think now the roster is definitely good enough to make a run. And it's going to be up to, I think, James Harden and Embiid. Harden could have been an interesting person to discuss in here too. The roster is good enough now that if Embiid is good enough, they can make a run. And I think if it's a great opportunity for Embiid to have his signature moment, and depending on how the matchups shake out, if they play Milwaukee or Boston in the second round of the playoffs, if they were to, I don't know if it would be considered an upset, but if they were to win that series, Embiid would finally kind of have his moment. And if they actually end up disappointing and not competitive in the playoffs in the second round, things could change big time for Philadelphia in the offseason, seems like. So I thought he was a good candidate here. I don't know if Howard, you would agree with that or not.
No, I definitely do. And I thought about him as well. And, you could, we could make this about James Harden too. We could make it about the two of them together. There's so much at stake there. And especially with all of these, the rumblings about Harden wanting to go back to Houston are very strange to me on like 100 different levels, because I just don't see how it makes any sense for anybody involved, but they're persistent. And so you can't dismiss them. And well, that's not going to happen, I don't think. I mean, in today's NBA, you should never say never to anything. It's probably not going to happen if they make a run to the finals or if they win the championship, especially, right? But if it's a case where they flame out, and the Sixers have had some flameouts, and James Harden has had many, many flameouts in multiple cities. If it goes that way, and Harden just decides, I'd rather just do something else again, then it calls into question everything in Philadelphia, right? Like, no one is suggesting that Joel Embiid is going to be the next superstar to ask out and all that stuff yet, but people have an eye on it. They have an eye on the situation. That's just the way the NBA is. If you're an NBA executive for one of the other teams, you always have an eye on these things. Right. And you're always watching to see, in an era where stars change teams so frequently, you're always watching to see, who's failing to meet expectations, who's ending the season on such a bitter note that they might want to try something else. And given everything Embiid's already been through, and plenty of heartbreak there and drama and the Ben Simmons saga and everything else, multiple coaches, he's been in the league a while, and he, keeps falling short in the playoffs, keeps falling short on MVP ballots. Like, again, I'm not going to be the one to suggest that he will be or should be seeking greener pastures, but it is to say that a lot rides on this postseason and that partnership between him and Harden.
Yeah, and I think the point about like the roster being there, he's like he is set up in a way that if he continues the performance from the regular season to the playoffs, they're set up for success. And Howard, like you said, it could be relative what success means, but they're set up to be competitive in any series they play in after in the second round. or even in the conference finals. They might have a tough matchup against the Celtics or so, but they have the talent to, I think, go toe to toe with any matchup.
And the thing is, like, because of Embiid, I give them a chance. Like, I don't, the Bucks and Celtics, I think, are ahead of everybody, but Embiid's unique. No one has an answer to Embiid. I mean, I guess Al Horford at times in the past has been an answer to Embiid, but Embiid is a handful to say the least, and he's got maybe the best supporting cast he's had around him. The Jimmy Butler year was pretty damn good, but no one is stopping Joel Embiid. I mean, no one's stopping Giannis either, but Embiid gives them a dimension and an advantage that I think you can't rule them out, right? No one's going to predict. Very few people, I think, when we get to mid-April, are going to predict the Sixers in the finals ahead of Boston or Milwaukee. I don't think too many people would pick them, but I think it'd be foolish to rule them out.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And even they played yesterday, right? The Bucks Sixers.
Won that game.
Yeah, you don't want to extrapolate too much from a regular season game, but the Bucks were making their shots. They got a big lead, and then the Sixers kind of had the resolve and the personnel to kind of come back and then play the end of the game quite strongly. So I agree with you. Like we do like every week in our episodes, we do tiers in each conference, and we have the Sixers like similar tier with the Celtics and Bucks, but kind of third among that group.
I would kind of make them the second tier. But they're in the second tier by themselves. There is no other second tier team. The first tier is Boston, Milwaukee. The second tier is Philly. Okay. And then the third tier is, some mishmash, I guess, of like, Cleveland, New York. Brooklyn is fading. Does somebody else enter that tier? I think Miami could be in that third tier with Cleveland and New York, but it's kind of murky after that.
All right. Do you want to, Howard, list a second guy from your list?
Sure. Let's go to the other extreme here. I actually have two names here, but I'm going to highlight one. They're related. But Gary Payton II. Oh, wow. I've gone a long ways from opening with Anthony Davis. I've been kind of a Warriors truther all season. And I said this recently on a Bay Area radio station where they were asking about, okay, do you still believe? And I'm like, listen, I have to put it this way. Logically, there was no reason, as they asked the question a week or so ago, there was no reason for me to make some bold statement in the Warriors' favor, right? None of the data suggests that the Warriors should be in conversations for, whatever's going on in the NBA in late May or especially June. The record doesn't suggest it. The net rating doesn't suggest it. The just overall stats, their defense, their road record, their inconsistency, the inability to keep everybody healthy. Like nothing suggests that the Warriors should still be in these conversations, but I still can't let go of it. And some of that is maybe nostalgia. Some of that is just the aura that is still projected by when you look out there and you see, oh, Steph, oh, he's healthy. Okay, and Clay's healthy and Draymond's healthy, and they're all three on the court at the same time. Yep, not betting against those guys. So there's a little bit of just kind of the like I say, aura, for lack of a better term, of this dynasty that is still there. The heart of that dynasty is still there. They still have the top, 6 or 7 guys from last season, and their starting five still has, if not the best, then one of the best net ratings for any 5-man unit. So most of the data, especially just the wins and losses, when you get to this stage of the season and you look at the standings and they are what they are, you can usually draw a hard line and say, sorry, everybody below this line is just out. Right. There is no discussion, but I still believe. So back to Gary Payton II. The Warriors starting five has been fine. Their top 6 have been fine. They have major drop-offs when they get to the bench. They've had injury issues. But Gary Payton II symbolically and practically represents what was working so well last season, that they actually got to, get back to the finals and win another championship in a year that most people thought they had no shot. And I don't know where his rehab is at this stage. It's probably still weeks, but Steph Curry, as we speak, is playing his first game in quite a while, so he's back there, back in the mix. He is 3 for 6 after missing his first few shots. By the way, he's still at -7 for the game, but so Steph is back out there, and when Payton gets back out there, think about what their rotation will then look like. You could have a starting 5 of back to the guys who were the core last year: Curry, Clay, Andrew Wiggins, Draymond Green, Kevon Looney. As good a starting 5 as you're going to get. And then Poole, Gary Payton, and some combination of DiVincenzo and Kuminga. That's 9 guys, and you really only have to play 7 or 8 in the playoffs. You've got more rest. You've got more days off. Are you betting against that group? If Gary Payton II looks at all like he did this time last year, or I should say, more like in the postseason last year, his defense, his versatility, his athleticism, his ability to just fly in for amazing alley-oops at times, hit the open 3 occasionally. It's weird to think that like one 7th, 8th man type is the difference, but in the NBA that often is the case. And it's also the difference between playing him versus playing Kuminga more minutes, or playing, I don't know, Ty Jerome, or Anthony Lamb, or whoever it's going to be, right? And so the secondary piece of that was, oh yeah, by the way, Andrew Wiggins is also a player of intrigue. Like, he's been out for weeks for personal reasons, and we're not sure why. And they need Wiggins to be Wiggins. But I'm assuming that Wiggins is just going to be back and doing what he does. So it's Payton who's kind of the wild card for them.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great pick. I didn't even thought about him, but I could just straight up now insert him to my top 5 as well, now that you mentioned him. And I would add, actually, I know you said Wiggins you'd expect to come back and play at a high level. I could like add them together maybe, because the thing with Wiggins is he was playing at such a high level in the playoffs last year. Regular season he was playing quite well too last year, but when a player, I think, has maybe the best performance of their career in the playoffs, that there is some, I don't know if the question mark, or it's not as certain that they're going to keep repeating that, the next year, rather than someone performing at a high level for a couple years, 2-3 regular seasons straight, because just the sample of games is smaller in the playoffs. So I'd kind of maybe add Payton and Wiggins together, especially because Wiggins is also, I think he has some, there's some, he's took some time off with personal issues, and hopefully that gets resolved. But I would kind of add both of them, I think.
I agree, and I actually put them down together when I jotted them down. And the thing with Wiggins too is Wiggins has this funny thing. He's one of these guys where you're always kind of wondering about the motor, right? Because it's been inconsistent, and that's why he couldn't be the franchise star in Minnesota. It wasn't about skill set or anything else. It was about the kind of the want to, right? Does he want to be this guy night in, night out? And there are times the Warriors will chuckle about this when he has one of those like eye-popping nights where he's just everywhere and he's scoring a bunch and he's playing really confident and he's attacking the basket and everything. And you ask somebody in the press conference afterwards, Steph or Clay, Steve Kerr, anybody, about it, and they'll kind of have the smile and chuckle, like, yeah, we want to see every night from him, kind of thing. But like, that's the NBA. There are guys who have the talent to be superstars and just don't have the same makeup to put it together every single night. And so you're right to say that like the playoffs was a small sample of sorts, but it's also when guys, if you are somebody who doesn't have the ability to manufacture the intensity night in, night out in a regular season for 82 games, and a lot of guys don't, the playoffs bring something different. And like, I'd be more like, you make a great point, Con, but I will say this: I'm more confident in Andrew Wiggins being the May, June Andrew Wiggins of last year again this April, May, June, than I would be confident in saying he would be that guy for the first 82 games.
Interesting.
Because I think he's one of those guys who he will rise to the occasion, and when the intensity level around him picks up, he locks in. But getting him to be that guy night in, night out in November, December, January, February is harder.
Yeah. No, that's a great point, especially with a team like the Warriors, where they won the championship, so like the playoffs, they're going to get more motivated then compared to the regular season. It's kind of like a reverse Tom Thibodeau team that's that's always motivated every game.
Get me in trouble with all my fellow New Yorkers here.
Yeah.
Well, it's not a bad thing. It's good to be motivated for a regular season.
No, but it's kind of a true thing, and it's kind of a hot button issue, and Knicks fans are very split on this. So and the Tibbs supporters are very like defensive about it. So anyway,
yeah.
All right. Well, I actually had a similar, not completely similar, but somewhat similar pick to Gary Payton and Andrew Wiggins, and that was DeAndre Ayton with the Suns. Because I think, I honestly, so right now, I think the West is still quite open. And that's why I think like Warriors are actually a good bet, because if it's wide open, why wouldn't we think about the, defending champions to kind of get that swagger and play well? I think maybe 10, 15 games later when we're approaching the playoffs, I have a feeling that the Suns are going to start getting to their own tier, unless if there's some injury concerns. And I think DeAndre Ayton, if the Suns are going to ascend, like I think they will, Ayton playing the role that is most beneficial to the team winning is going to be really crucial in terms of the defensive part of it, the rebounding. Maybe, I think this has been what people say as one of Ayton's major shortcomings on offense, is not being aggressive enough going to the rim, going to the free throw line, and kind of settling more to paint hook shots or jumpers, which he's extremely effective at. But I think Ayton kind of adopting a mentality of going a bit more to the rim, focusing on rebounding, on defense, in a team like this, that this talented, I think can really put them over the top. But it's not an easy role. And I think, Howard, you would have a great feeling of this kind of when you're so close with the players. Like, it's not, everyone says do the dirty things, do these small things, but then as a player, it's, I imagine, just not, as easy to do for everyone.
No, ego is involved. Pride is involved. Again, when you're the number one overall pick, that label never goes away. And some guys get into a comfort zone where they're not trying to play up to the label anymore. They're just, like Wiggins is a great example of a guy who's just settled in and has realized, like, what, my best role is to be like the third, fourth, fifth guy, and just do what I do and not have to carry it. And actually that's a luxury. And Ayton, he's had an interesting career, right? And, we still don't know exactly what happened between him and Monty Williams last spring, but like, there's clearly some stuff there. And I think some sensitivities there, and maybe some insecurities, or just maybe it's pride getting in the way, whatever it may be. And now he's in this interesting position where, like, I was just pulling up the box score for today. They beat the Mavericks. Ayton took 6 shots.
I thought it too.
So,
16 rebounds.
But 16 rebounds. Yeah. So, to his credit, dude, like, worked his ass off on the boards. And that's great. He picked up 5 fouls on the way. I couldn't watch the game. I was visiting a friend, so I missed it this afternoon. But like, it looks like this was one of those games where it's like, you said it, you want him to do the little things, and especially now when you've got yet another, elite offensive player, an all-time elite offensive player in Kevin Durant. Like, sorry, DeAndre, you're probably just not going to get as many shots as you would like to, ideally. And if he's okay with that and he's going to do the dirty work stuff, like, going out and getting 16 rebounds as he did today, hey, fantastic. Got a block and a steal along the way here. And to your point again, only 2 trips to the line. But there's a lot you can do when you're playing off of, Durant, Booker, and Paul. Yeah. He'll have plenty of opportunities, I think, to just, be able to attack the basket and get open looks inside. But yeah, the screening and the rebounding and the defense and the rim protection are all going to be really critical things, and he's got to be happy doing it. And if he's not, that's where you start to get into trouble. And maybe that's what was going on some level last spring.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Let me do a quick reminder, Howard, of our fundraising efforts. As you can see, we have the QR code up on the screen. You can use your phone to scan it. And this is a direct donation to DC Earthquake Relief Fund that I'm personally involved with, starting the day of the earthquake, February 6th, right after we started raising money. We raised over $50,000 so far that we used it for to help with displaced families, for container homes, tents, medical supplies, as well as scholarships for kids affected by the earthquake. If you'd rather do a tax-deductible donation, there we have links in the description you can take a look at, and you can find more information about the funds and organizations. And once again, I thank everyone who has donated so far. We raised a lot of money so far for both organizations. We really appreciate it, and we also appreciate Howard taking time to come and help with the efforts.
Yeah, and I'll just add, I have my email account open, and I'm seeing when donations come, like the emails come. So really, and it's a great kind of feeling for when seeing people donate. So I really want to thank everyone as well, and just to remind that we're as Pick and Pop, we're also matching the donations today. So kind of if you donate, we're kind of doubling the impact. And there is still, it's been almost a month since the earthquake, but there's still a lot of people in dire need in terms of just very basic necessities. So thanks to everyone, and thanks to Howard, of course.
Maybe let's talk about the last player on Howard's list, and then we can wrap up and slowly. So if you want to,
so how about this? I'll throw out 3 names. You guys tell me which one you want to talk about.
Oh, perfect.
All right. Kyrie Irving, Julius Randle, or Russell Westbrook.
I'd like to end on a more positive note. So maybe Randle, Brunson, Knicks could be like an interesting topic.
Sure. Yeah, that's a little more. That is definitely a more positive note. The other 2 are a little bit fraught. One of them extremely fraught, since apparently the Clippers are never going to win a game again.
Can you never win and win the championship? I'm not sure.
I think that's a no. I think if you never win another game, it takes you out of title contention. I'd have to check the advanced stats on that one, though. I was at the Sloan conference a couple of days ago. I should have asked those guys, is it possible to win the championship if Russell Westbrook is on your team and you never win another game again?
Let's talk about Randle, but maybe one sentence, Howard, about Westbrook. Do you understand the move? Like, does it make sense to you? Or like not only them signing him, but also starting him and playing him major minutes? Do you see it ever working, or is it hopeless?
So one of the reasons I actually decided to bring up Westbrook in the first place is because the questions that surround him aren't just about the Clippers, although those are really big questions for them right now because it's really important that they win. And the hour is getting late in the Kawhi, Paul George era, but also like Russ has now bounced around from Oklahoma to Houston to Washington to the Lakers to briefly with the Jazz, who obviously didn't want him, and down to the Clippers, and time's running out for him. And so to answer your question, I heard, some time ago, before the trade deadline, before it was clear where he was going to go and what might be next for him and who would, where he would land, would he be bought out? I knew that the Clippers were looking for another point guard, and I knew that a lot of the reason for that was that, Tyronn Lue specifically wanted a primary ball handler, a lead guard type. Yeah. I don't want to say pure point guard because Russ is not that. He wanted a stronger lead guard. He wanted somebody who could set up Kawhi Leonard and Paul George. Those guys are both great with the ball in their hands. They're both great at creating offense for themselves. They both have had, in fact, you look at their careers, both Paul George and Kawhi Leonard, not known as major playmakers in their previous stops, but they've both had multiple seasons of career highs in assist average with the Clippers. So to their credit, they've expanded their game, but it's still not what you want ideally. Ideally, you want like a really strong point guard with them, I think. I think ideally you want like Mike Conley type, right. Not a Russell Westbrook, but Westbrook's the guy they could get. Westbrook was the guy that was available. And I think Ty Lue has an affinity for him. And he qualifies as a lead guard. He qualifies as a guy who will bring the ball up, attack the defense, create openings, and set up your stars. He's got a good record of doing that. He also has a lot of other things, right? The things he won't do and the things he doesn't do. And the efficiency that he will very rarely have, and the high turnovers and everything else. So there was a risk. And I will say, while I sort of understood it from the Clippers standpoint, because I knew how badly Ty Lue wanted somebody in that role and that they needed an upgrade, you know, I think the response around the league when they made the move was mixed at best, and I think more skepticism than anything else, because there hasn't been a lot of winning around Russell Westbrook recently, and he's a problematic player because he's got to have the ball in his hands so much, and because he can't space the defense. So that means there's other guys you can't put out on the court with him effectively, whether that's in this case now Plumlee and Zubac, whereas before it was, you know, Anthony Davis and, you know, others. I mean, it's always difficult. As talented as Russell Westbrook is and remains, it's just hard to find the right combination around him. And now they're in this position where they've lost all these games, and you have to. It's embarrassing to pull the plug for him and for them. This idea, well, it's a low risk thing because, you know, hey, you're paying him the minimum. You can always just cut him. Nobody wants to cut Russell Westbrook. Yeah. like they don't want to do that. That's humiliating for him and not so great for them. Do you move him to the bench? Eric Gordon makes more sense. They already had picked him up. They could have just stopped there, but I guess you know Eric Gordon was viewed as more of a hybrid, but he can shoot. They've really kind of painted themselves into a corner. And if it doesn't go well, it's bad for everyone, because the Clippers, as I say, time's running out on this era with Kawhi and Paul George. They really need to make a deep run. And obviously they thought of Westbrook as the linchpin to that. But if it goes badly, it also means, like, you know, I already wonder, where is Westbrook fit next season anyway? Like, there's already that question around the league. Who's going to sign him this summer? And is it possible he's done? Which seems on one level ludicrous. Like, it's offensive just to ask that question to some people, but it's hard to find the right fit.
Yeah. And I think it's just hard to, like, if he had a role that he was playing 10, 15 minutes a game in the playoffs and he was kind of going full Westbrook in those limited minutes, you know, I can see it being quite positive in certain cases. But like you're saying, I think the element of, you know, the player's stature, and he has a playing style that I think is almost like hard to play in super short amounts. You kind of see the things he's, you know, handling the ball, attacking the rim, and maybe you think, oh, I want to play him like 5 more minutes. It's just hard player type to play a small amount of type too, I think, given, you know, that he's Russell Westbrook, like you're saying.
Yes. And this is the thing. I've seen versions of this over the years, over the decades. Some guys just don't know how to play as anything less than a star and as anything less than the center of the universe, basically. Mm-hmm. And it's not, I'm not saying as a criticism. I'm not saying, oh, it's because they're an egomaniac or anything. They can't make the adjustment. They just can't. Vince Carter did it brilliantly for the back half of his career. Paul Pierce did it semi-willingly and then less willingly, right? Kobe would have never accepted anything less than the lead role, no matter how many injuries he had, no matter how many miles he had. Steve Francis couldn't do it. Marbury couldn't do it. Iverson couldn't do it. Carmelo couldn't do it until he was out of the league for a year, and then he kind of said, "Oh, well, if I want to play again, I guess I got to be willing to just be kind of a catch and shoot guy." And then he kind of revived himself, but now he's, you know, obviously, I don't think he's officially done, but he's probably unofficially done. It's hard. It's hard for guys to make the adjustment, especially if you're built like Westbrook, where the ball has been in your hands your entire career.
Yeah, totally agree.
I guess we couldn't avoid talking about Westbrook. It always ends up happening in our shows too, but I think it's a very fascinating subject, so it's completely fine. Do we want to wrap up slowly? Since I know, Howard, you need to.
I should get going. But real quick on the Julius Randle front. I mean, obviously the guy has been on fire. I mean, he's having a great season regardless, or just period. But last 5 games, averaging 32 points, 6.5 rebounds, 4.5 assists, shooting 54% and 50 from 3. And the Knicks now have a shot to even crack the top 4 in the East. Who would have ever guessed? there's a lot of this that has to do with Jalen Brunson and what he's brought to that team. But all credit to Randall, who the fans were ready to banish him forever last season and even earlier this season, and understandably so. And people in our positions, in the media and the punditry were basically writing him off. Like, the one great season where he made all NBA second team looked like the outlier. When you go from that to last season, it makes it look like, well, okay, there was only one really great season and everything else, like the last season, looked more similar to what he always was. So there's no reason to think he's going to revive himself and find a way to be this effective and rein himself in a little bit. He still has those moments where he dominates the ball a little bit and throws up some shots that make Knicks fans kind of cringe. But he's just, to his credit, again, like, he's just got him. He's in a really good headspace. I think he's playing really efficiently. And Brunson has taken some of the pressure off of him, especially in late game situations. And so if the reason he's still a player of intrigue is like, okay, crunch time, last several weeks of the season, trying to make the 4th seed. What does he do in the playoffs? Because as you guys framed this, it was the rest of season and playoffs. Mm-hmm. Can he continue this in the playoffs? Because the question with the Knicks has been like, well, okay, they're good, they're solid, they're a typical Tibbs team that's going to squeeze out more wins than they maybe should on paper. You're going to play hard defense, but your upside in this league is always tied to your best player. And do you have a star that you can hang your hat on? And they don't have the traditional superstars on this roster. They've got, 2 guys who any given year, you're not sure if they'll be all-stars or not, but they're playing their butts off. And Randall at this level means the Knicks have a chance to make some noise.
Yeah, I think you mentioned that he was All-NBA second team 2 seasons ago. He probably, I'm guessing, won't make All-NBA second team this year, but I think he's been better this season than he has been 2 years ago. He's not shooting that ridiculous percentage from 3-point line, but better finisher, more efficient. He's a more effective player, I think, than he's been All-NBA second team. Very impressive.
Yeah, I haven't started scoping out like who's in the running yet, so I couldn't even tell you if he would be on the ballot right now. But he'll be in the discussion, that's for sure.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Howard, we'll let you go, but I have to ask one thing, because after we announced that we're having we're doing a show with you, the amount of messages we got saying "What up, Beck?" was crazy. And I was like, we need to hear him tell the story. So I just wanted to ask really quickly where that comes from. And I think you can maybe touch on your history and relationship with late Kobe Bryant as well.
Yeah, sure. And I don't mind at all. And it always makes me smile to hear that people are responding with the phrase. It's fun, and all credit to my good friend Zach Lowe for making that a thing, which I could not have imagined 10 years ago or whenever it was. I went on his podcast when Zach was still with Grantland. I think it was the first time I'd gone on his podcast. And I might have even gone on to talk about my Laker years. I covered the Lakers for the LA Daily News from 1997 to 2004. So that was the Shaq and Kobe era, of course. And maybe I was on his podcast to talk about that. And so Zach, while we're talking, says, I always thought it was really cool. And he's remembering back to this moment. He says, I thought it was really cool. We were covering the lockout. This is the NBA's labor standoff, the lockout back in 2011. He goes, and I remember you and I were covering the lockout. I was at the New York Times at the time. He's at Grantland. And he says, I remember we went to this one, it was a Players Association meeting where all the players had come into New York to talk about where things were in the negotiations. And we're standing in the lobby of the Sheraton Hotel in Midtown Manhattan. And he says he remembers Kobe Bryant. All the players are starting to filter out of this players meeting, and Kobe's walking through the lobby, sunglasses on, looking cool, looking like Kobe, because Kobe can look cool without even trying, but he had the sunglasses on just to make sure. And he's walking by, sees me, and just says, "What up, Beck?" And then keeps walking. And so Zach told this story. I had no recollection of this actually happening. But Zach just thought it was a really cool thing because, well, it's Kobe, and Kobe's didn't acknowledge anybody else as he walked through. And I don't even remember this really, really happening until Zach mentioned it. But he tells the story. We have a good laugh about it. We probably talk about Kobe and Shaq for a while or whatever on this episode of his show on the Grantland, or Low Post as part of Grantland, whatever it was, 10 years ago. And that's it. And so the next time I went back on the podcast, first of all, there was a flood of people tweeting at us afterward and tweeting at me about the What Up Beck story. They loved that. And a lot of people would tweet at me what up Beck. And then they would, because Zach specifically mentioned Kobe with the sunglasses, people were finding any number of GIFs with people either with sunglasses on or doing the quick thing with the sunglasses, or, they pull them down just slightly to do that cool kind of like, and so that became like a running gag. And then every time I've gone on the podcast since, for the last however many years, Zach, of course, always introduces me with that. So the roots of it have kind of gotten lost along the way. People just think it's just like a fun thing that Zach loves to say to introduce me when I come on the podcast. But yeah, those are in fact Kobe Bryant's words. And I love the fact that it's become a thing for a bunch of different reasons, not least of which is that, obviously since we lost Kobe a few years ago, it's kind of a nice way to remember him or have this bit of the interaction resonate. And it gives me an excuse to tell the story at least once a year. So that's fun.
Yeah. Thank you for retelling it for our audience too. I know you told that story a million times, but we appreciate it.
Absolutely.
Well, before we close, I want to just do the reminders one more time. So that, because this will go up on YouTube, we're going to have the QR code. You can still donate using the QR code after the show is over, or using any of the links in the description. And we are matching any donation that comes. And so that will be doubling the impact. Also, as we announced in our earlier programs, that was in Turkish, but I'll just say it here. We are donating every dollar that we make in 2023 through the donate button, through thanks button, or any ad money through our YouTube channel and Spotify and Apple and Google Podcasts. We'll be donating. So if you don't have Venmo or PayPal or any of those ways, if you use the join or thanks button, you could, by supporting us, we're directing 100% of the proceeds to people impacted in the region. So that's another way to contribute as well. And as I said, you can do that after we turn off the broadcast, and you can use the YouTube link to do so. Howard, thank you so much once again. It is really, I'm speaking both for Khan and I. It's a great honor and pleasure to have you with us. Thank you for being so generous with your time. We really, really appreciate it. And looks like we are raising a lot of money, and that is thanks to you, and also thanks to Ben Taylor of Thinking Basketball. I want to thank him again as well. Khan,
thank you guys for having me. I was flattered and honored that you guys reached out, especially given that the show today is dedicated to such an important cause. And so it was an automatic yes for me to be able to help at all. Obviously, always happy to talk basketball anyway, but if it's at a moment like this and an important cause like this, like I say, it was a no-brainer for me. So I happy I could help. Hope people are donating generously. I will do so myself when I sign off. And hope you raise a ton of money, and just obviously wishing the best to anybody impacted. And thank you guys for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Take care, guys.
Thank you, Howard. Okay. I guess I'll end the broadcast. Thank you everyone for watching and donating. You could keep donating. I guess I can finish off in Turkish. Türkçe bilen ve
Türkçe hatırlıyorsun.
Türkçe biraz switch etmek zor oldu. Herkese çok teşekkürler izlediğiniz için, bağış yaptığınız için. katıl butonu ve teşekkürler butonunu kullanarak bağış yapan çok takipçimiz oldu. Zafer Müminoğlu, Devlet Karaz, Ferhat Doğrugören, gördüklerim. Bulb 80 geçen seferde yardımcı olmuştu. Yine bağış yapmış. Bunlar sadece teşekkürler ve katıl butonunu yapanlar. Venmo'dan, yani QR koddan gelen çok sayıda bağış oldu. PayPal'a oldu. Herkese teşekkür ederiz. Kaan, sen istersen sen de birkaç kelime kapatalım.
Evet, herkese teşekkürler. Zaten hani söylemiştik, sene boyunca bize hani katıl butonundan veya farklı şekillerde destek olursanız onu %100 deprem dayanışmasına iletiyoruz. Herkese çok teşekkürler bu programa katıldığınız için.